On April 8, 2026, 100 airstrikes hit Lebanon in 10 minutes. 254 people killed in a single day. 1 million displaced, 20% of the entire country in under 3 weeks. Hospitals in Beirut flooded with casualties. The American University Medical Center issued an emergency appeal for blood. Ambulances could not reach the wounded because the roads were blocked by the people trying to flee. 180,000 refugees who had fled Syria to Lebanon, who had rebuilt their lives, enrolled their children in schools, learned to call someone else's country home, were now fleeing back to Syria, back to the country they had escaped, because the country that had taken them in was being destroyed. In the city of Baalbek, residents ran into a Roman temple, not to pray, not to visit, to survive. They believed that a structure listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a temple that has stood for 2,000 years, might protect them from bombs that the rest of the city could not. They were sheltering inside history, because the present had become uninhabitable. Beirut has been destroyed and rebuilt 7 times in 5,000 years of recorded history. This is the 8th. But the country being bombed right now is not what most of the world thinks it is. Every letter in every word you are hearing, every character in every alphabet used across the Western world, traces its origin to a single city on this country's coast, a place that has been lived in continuously for 7,000 years. What does it mean to destroy a country that taught the world to write? The answer begins not with war, but with a harbour. 42 kilometers north of Beirut, on a promontory overlooking the Mediterranean, the fishing port of Byblos wakes before dawn. The harbour is a crescent of stone, old stone worn smooth by 7,000 years of rope and salt and hull. The boats are small, wooden, most of them, painted in blues and greens that have faded to the same color as the sea. Youssef Malouf has fished from this harbor for 31 years. He launches before first light when the water in the harbor is still enough to reflect the Crusader castle above it, a castle built from stones that the Crusaders took from the Phoenician walls beneath it, which were built from stones quarried before the invention of writing. His boat passes over all of it. He does not think about archaeology. He thinks about sardines. His grandfather sold sardines to the French soldiers who garrisoned the town during the Mandate. His father sold them during the Civil War. Youssef sells them now. The harbor has never stopped, not for empires, not for wars, not for the ruins that archaeologists come from 6 continents to study. The Greeks named this city Byblos because papyrus, the material the ancient world wrote on, was shipped from this port. The English word Bible derives directly from this city's name. The area has been inhabited since at least 5,000 BC. More than a century of excavation has uncovered Neolithic dwellings beneath Phoenician walls, beneath Roman columns, beneath Crusader fortifications, beneath Ottoman streets. A city rebuilt so many times that the ground itself is a compressed archive of civilization. But the most important thing Byblos produced was not a building. It was a system of marks that changed the way human beings communicate. Around 1200 BC, scribes here developed the Phoenician alphabet. 22 characters, each representing a sound, not an idea, a radical departure from the hieroglyphs and cuneiform that had dominated for millennia. Egyptian hieroglyphs required hundreds of symbols. Babylonian cuneiform required years to master. The Phoenician alphabet required 22 letters and the ability to combine them. The mechanism was economic as much as linguistic. Hieroglyphs and cuneiform were tools of priests and palace scribes, elite systems that kept literacy in the hands of the powerful. An alphabet anyone could learn in weeks meant that merchants could write their own contracts. Sailors could log their own voyages. Writing stopped being a monopoly and became a utility. By 800 BC, the Greeks had adopted it, adding vowels to create the Greek alphabet. The Greeks passed it to the Romans, who adapted it into Latin. Every word written in English, French, Spanish, German, and dozens of other languages descends from a system invented in a harbour where a fisherman named Yusuf now sells sardines. The earliest known inscription using this alphabet, carved into the sarcophagus of King Ahiram of Byblos around 1000 BC, is now in the National Museum in Beirut. The museum sits on what was once the Green Line, dividing the city during the Civil War. Bullet holes pockmark the entrance. The sarcophagus survived because museum staff sealed it behind a wall of concrete before the fighting reached the building. The alphabet that taught the world to write was protected by people who knew what it meant to lose everything else. There is a cliff face along the Nahr el-Kalb, the Dog River, north of Beirut, where every army that has ever invaded this country carved its name into the rock. Ramesses II, Nebuchadnezzar, the Romans, the Mamluks, the French, the Allied forces in the Second World War. 22 inscriptions in total. The cliff is a geological guest book, signed by every empire that thought it would be the last. None of them were. No Lebanese inscription appears on the cliff. The people who live here have never been the ones marching through. They are the ones who remain after the marching stops. Lebanon is smaller than Connecticut, 10,452 square kilometers, a sliver of land pressed between the Mediterranean and the Syrian border. You can drive from its northern border to its southern tip in under 4 hours. Its widest point is 88 kilometers. Its coastline stretches just 225 kilometers. Within that sliver, 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, 11,000 years of continuous habitation. The remains of Phoenician, Egyptian, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Mamluk, Ottoman, and French civilizations, layered on top of one another like geological strata. Dig anywhere in Lebanon, and you will find someone else's empire underneath. Today, 73 of Lebanon's cultural sites are under UNESCO enhanced protection, the highest number of any country on Earth. That number is not a distinction, it is a measure of danger. Lebanon's mountains were once covered in cedar forests so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. The cedar of Lebanon, Cedrus libani, grew to 35 meters tall, with trunks so broad that 4 men linking arms could not encircle them. The cedar is mentioned 103 times in the Bible. It appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature, where the cedar forest is guarded by a demigod appointed by the Sumerian god Enlil. Gilgamesh enters the forest, defeats the guardian, and cuts the trees. It is perhaps the first recorded act of deforestation in human history. The Egyptians used the resin for mummification and the wood for coffins. Solomon's temple in Jerusalem was built from Lebanese cedar, shipped from the port of Byblos. The Ottomans used the timber to build railways. By the 16th century, a French traveller counted 28 trees remaining. By 1697, an Englishman counted 16. Today, in the Kadisha Valley above the town of Bashari, 375 cedars remain. The walk into the grove is quiet. The air, at 2,000 meters, is thin and cool, even in summer. The trees are not tall in the way that redwoods are tall. They spread horizontally, their branches extending outward in flat, layered canopies that look, from below, like dark green ceilings suspended on massive grey pillars. The bark is thick, furrowed, warm to the touch even in cold air. It smells faintly of resin, a clean, sharp scent that has been described in texts for 4,000 years and smells exactly the way those texts suggest. In the canopy above, white silk pouches hang from the branches, the nests of processionary pine moth larvae. The caterpillars march in single file along the branches, nose to tail, following silk threads they lay as they move. Their entire life cycle is built around a tree that has outlived every empire that tried to cut it down. The moth depends on the cedar. The cedar predates the moth by millennia. It is a relationship built on the persistence of something far older than itself. Two of the trees in this grove are estimated to be over 3,000 years old. They were alive when the alphabet was being carved into King Ahiram's sarcophagus. They were alive when Solomon's temple was being built with wood cut from their neighbors. They are still alive now. The cedars are on the flag, a green tree on a white field flanked by two red stripes. The symbol of a nation is the last survivor of a forest that every empire stripped bare. Below the cedars, the Kadisha Valley drops 1,000 meters in near vertical walls of Jurassic limestone. The name means holy in Aramaic. Since the 4th century, Christian monks have carved monasteries into these cliffs, not built on them, carved into them. The monastery of Canabine sits halfway up a rock face, accessible only by a narrow path cut into the stone. The path is wide enough for one person. There is no railing. Below, the valley floor is a green thread of river and walnut trees, 1,000 meters down. The monastery's entrance is a wooden door set into the rock face, so small that visitors must duck to enter. Inside, the air is cool and still, 10 degrees cooler than the valley rim. Candle smoke drifts upward through natural fissures in the rock that act as chimneys, ventilating chambers that have never had windows. The walls are painted with frescoes so old that the pigment has bonded with the limestone. The paint and the rock are becoming the same material. The monks still chant in Syriac, a language descended from Aramaic, the language Christ spoke. The sound echoes off the same walls that have reflected these prayers for 1,600 years. The acoustics are not designed, they are geological. The cave amplifies certain frequencies and absorbs others, so that a single voice sounds like three. Deeper in the valley, the monastery of Kojaya housed the first printing press in the Middle East, installed in 1585, printing the Book of Psalms in Syriac script decades before most of Europe had widespread access to printed books. And in 1989, speleologists exploring a cave in the upper valley discovered 8 naturally mummified Maronite villages dated to 1283 AD, their clothing intact, their hair visible. A community preserved in the rock of a valley that had sheltered their faith for a millennium before they were buried. The town at the head of the valley is Bishari, birthplace of Khalil Gibran, the third best-selling poet in history after Shakespeare and Lao Tzu. His museum sits in a grotto carved into the hillside below the jaw.
Cedars.
He wrote about Lebanon the way the cedars exist in it, rooted, patient, watching everything pass. South of the Kadisha, the mountains descend toward the Beqaa, a broad valley running the length of the country between 2 parallel mountain ranges. The Beqaa is Lebanon's agricultural heartland. The valley has been farmed for at least 5,000 years. The winemaking may be among the oldest in the world. The process has changed remarkably little. Grapes are still harvested by hand in September, when the sugar content peaks after long Beqaa summers. The valley floor sits at 900 meters, with hot days and cool nights that force the grapes to develop slowly, concentrating flavor. The soil is chalky limestone, mineral-rich, well-drained, the kind of terroir that winemakers in France spend fortunes trying to replicate. The climate is almost identical to Bordeaux. Lebanese wine has been produced here continuously for longer than France has existed as a country. At Chateau Ksara, the oldest commercial winery in Lebanon, founded in 1857, wines age in Roman-era caves discovered accidentally by Jesuit monks who followed a fox into a hole in the hillside. The caves maintain a constant temperature of 13 degrees year-round, without mechanical cooling. 2 kilometers of tunnels. The monks understood what the Romans had built without understanding why it worked. Thermal mass. The rock absorbs heat during the day and releases it at night, maintaining equilibrium. The same principle that cools the wind towers of the Persian Gulf applied underground, by accident, to wine. The Beqaa is also where Hezbollah draws its deepest support. The same valley that grows the grapes and feeds the nation is the military heartland of the movement that has drawn Israeli bombardment for decades. The most fertile land in Lebanon is also the most bombed. The things that sustain the country and the things that destroy it share the same geography. At the eastern end of the Beqaa, the city of Baalbek rises from the valley floor. 11,000 years of continuous habitation. The Romans began constructing what would become one of the most ambitious building projects in their empire. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek is the largest Roman temple ever built. Its 6 remaining columns, each 22 meters tall, cut from single pieces of granite quarried in Aswan and transported more than 1,000 kilometers, are among the tallest standing columns in the ancient world. But the foundation stones defy explanation. The 3 stones, known as the trilithon, each weigh approximately 800 tons. They were quarried from a site 1 kilometer away, transported without wheels or cranes that could bear the load, and lifted into position at a height of 7 meters. The joints between them are so precise that a razor blade cannot be inserted into the seam. Modern engineers have studied the problem and concluded that replicating it with ancient technology would require a workforce of more than 40,000 men. A system of wooden rollers replaced every few hundred meters as they splintered under the weight, and a ramp stretching hundreds of meters at a gradient shallow enough for human hauling. No archaeological evidence of such a ramp has been found, A fourth stone, the stone of the pregnant woman, over 1,000 tons, lies partially quarried nearby. It was never moved. No one knows why. The tool marks on its surface are still visible. Chisel strikes frozen mid-stroke, as if the workers simply stopped one afternoon and never returned. Next to the Temple of Jupiter, the Temple of Bacchus stands almost completely intact. It is larger than the Parthenon. Most visitors who see it for the first time assume it is the main temple. It is not. It is the smaller one. Standing between the columns at dusk, the scale becomes physical. Each column is wider than a car and taller than a 5-story building. The stone is warm from the day's heat. You can press your palm flat against it and feel the stored sun releasing slowly into the cooling air. The carvings, grape clusters, poppies, lions, eagle heads, are cut so deep into the stone that they cast their own shadows within shadows. 2,000 years of wind and rain have not softened them. The stone is harder than the weather. At the western end of the Beqaa stand the only Umayyad ruins in Lebanon, Anjar, a city built in the 8th century AD by Caliph Walid I, abandoned within decades and never rebuilt. Its colonnaded streets, palace, mosque and bathhouse are a single frozen moment. One civilization's ambition, preserved not because anyone chose to maintain it, but because no one came back to build on top of it. In a country where every other site is a palimpsest, layers upon layers compressed into the same ground, Anjar is the exception. One layer, one moment, one empire that built something and walked away. In October 2024, an airstrike hit 500 meters from the temple complex. The Palmyra Hotel, a 150-year-old landmark that had welcomed guests through 2 world wars, a 15-year civil war, and an economic collapse that erased 90% of the currency's value, had its doors blown out. Kaiser Wilhelm II stayed in its rooms. Nina Simone performed there. Charles de Gaulle slept beneath its ceiling. The Declaration of Greater Lebanon, the document that drew the borders of the modern country, was signed there under the French mandate. Rabbi Salika is 45 years old. He has worked at the Palmyra for more than half his life. When the airstrike hit, he swept the glass from between Roman busts that had lined the lobby for a century. He has not left. He says he will not leave. This hotel hasn't closed its doors for 150 years, he says. He is still sweeping. Outside the hotel, residents did what no tourist had ever done. They moved into the temples. Families carried blankets and water into the complex and slept between columns erected before the birth of Christ, in chambers where Roman priests once made offerings to Jupiter. They were betting their lives on UNESCO status, on the idea that the international community would protect 2,000-year-old stones, even if it would not protect the people standing between them. It did not protect them. In November, a direct strike destroyed a heritage house meters from the temples. The northern gate was confirmed damaged. The stone that was harder than the weather was not harder than the bombs. The Phoenicians did not call themselves Phoenicians. That was a Greek name, from phonix, meaning purple, after the dye they extracted from murex sea snails along this coast. The process was brutal and specific. Each snail contains a single gland, smaller than a grain of rice, that produces a few drops of yellowish fluid. Exposed to sunlight, the fluid turns purple. A single gram of dye required the crushing of 12,000 snails. The color was so expensive that only royalty could afford it. The robes of Roman emperors, the vestments of Catholic bishops. The color purple, the color of power across the Western world, was invented on these beaches. The mounds of crushed shells are still visible along the coast at Sidon. Meters deep, tens of millions of snails processed over centuries. A geological trace that has outlasted the name itself. Phoenician traders carried this alphabet across the Mediterranean on ships built from Lebanese cedar, planks edge-joined with mortise and tenon joints, each tenon fitted without nails, the seams sealed with resin and beeswax. The ships were seaworthy enough to cross open ocean. They reached Spain. They reached West Africa. The Phoenicians established Carthage in modern-day Tunisia, Cadiz in Spain, and trading posts across Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta. Their trade network connected tin from Britain, silver from Spain, ivory from Africa, and silk from the East, routed through ports along the Lebanese coast. Wherever they landed, the alphabet came with them. It is the spring of 332 BC. Alexander the Great stands on the Lebanese coast, staring at an island half a mile offshore. Tyre, the wealthiest port in Phoenicia, the city that controls the eastern Mediterranean. His army has conquered everything between Greece and Egypt. Tyre has refused to surrender. The city sits on rock, surrounded by water deep enough to drown a horse, protected by walls that rise directly from the sea. It is, by the standards of the ancient world, impregnable. Alexander orders his engineers to build a road across the open water. Not a bridge, a solid causeway of stone, rubble, and felled timber dumped into the Mediterranean load by load. The first 100 meters are easy. The water is shallow near shore. Then it deepens. The currents strengthen. The Tyrians launch fire ships from the harbour, setting the construction ablaze. Alexander's men rebuild. The Tyrians send divers to cut the wooden pilings underwater. Alexander adds stone. He widens the causeway and mounts siege towers on it. The Tyrians respond with catapults from the walls. 7 months of this, stone against fire, engineering against ingenuity, each side adapting to the other's adaptations. When the causeway finally reaches the island, Alexander's men pour through breaches in the walls. 8,000 defenders are killed in the fighting. 2,000 are crucified along the beach as a warning to other cities that refuse to open their gates. The causeway still exists. Over 23 centuries, sand and sediment accumulated around it, turning the island into a peninsula. The geography of modern Tyre, the fact that it is connected to the mainland at all, is a consequence of Alexander's siege. The shape of a city, permanently altered by a single act of destruction. Fishermen now walk across ground that was once open sea. Children play football on land that Alexander built from rubble and corpses. Alexander's army passed the cliff at Nahr el-Kalb on their march south. They did not carve their name into the rock. Others did it for them later. But the cliff was already old when Alexander saw it. It had been collecting the names of invaders for 1,000 years before he arrived, and it would collect them for 2,000 more after he left. The cliff has room for more inscriptions. It always does. Off the rocky coast below Byblos, between the headlands where fishing boats round the point at dawn, a shape occasionally surfaces. Grey, scarred, solitary. The Mediterranean monk seal is one of the rarest marine mammals on Earth. Fewer than 700 survive worldwide. They once bred along the entire Lebanese coast, hauling themselves into sea caves to rest and nurse their young. They are so wary of human contact that they will abandon a cave if they detect a single unfamiliar scent. Fishermen report sightings: a dark shape in the water, a brief surfacing, gone before anyone reaches for a camera. Youssef says his father saw them regularly. He has seen one twice in 31 years. Along the coast between Byblos and Beirut, the Jita Grotto descends 9 kilometers into limestone bedrock. Stalactites formed over millions of years in chambers so large they contain underground lakes, navigable by boat. Every explosion above sends vibrations through rock that has been forming since before Homo sapiens existed. Further south, Sidon's Crusader Sea Castle juts into the harbour above souks that have operated since the medieval period. In Tripoli, the Khan El Saboun has produced olive oil soap using the same cold press technique for 600 years. These are not preserved relics, they are businesses. They open every morning and close every evening and have done so for centuries without needing to call themselves heritage. And then there is Beirut, the city that has been destroyed and rebuilt 7 times in 5,000 years. 2.4 million people, nearly half the country, live here. 80% of Lebanon's imports arrive through its port. The city was founded by the Phoenicians as Berytus. Coins from the 1st century BC show a dolphin entwined around an anchor, a symbol later adopted by the Venetian printer Aldus Manutius as his emblem. Even Beirut's imagery migrated westward, carried by the same currents that spread the alphabet. The Romans built a law school here that became one of the most prestigious in the ancient world. For 3 centuries, legal scholars trained in Beirut shaped the jurisprudence of the empire. They helped draft the Justinian Code, the legal framework that would become the foundation of European law. The principles of contract, property, and inheritance that govern courtrooms from London to Buenos Aires trace their intellectual lineage through Roman legal scholars who studied in this city. In 551 AD, an earthquake and tsunami killed 30,000 people and collapsed the school. The survivors rebuilt. The alphabet from Byblos, the laws from Beirut, the color purple from Sidon. 3 things that structure the world you are sitting in right now. How you write, how your laws work, what color signifies power. All originated in a country smaller than Connecticut that is being bombed for the 8th time. By the 1960s, Beirut had become the Paris of the Middle East, not as a compliment to Paris, but as a statement of fact. 18 recognized religious sects balanced power through confessional governance. International banks, airlines to every European and Arab capital. The American University of Beirut drew students from across the region. It is April 13th, 1975. A bus carrying Palestinian passengers through the Christian neighborhood of Ain el-Rumaneh is attacked. 27 people are killed. The civil war that had been building for decades ignites. 15 years, 120,000 dead. Beirut divided along the Green Line, a strip of no man's land that ran through what had been the commercial heart of the city. The line was not a wall. It was an absence, a corridor of collapsed buildings, overgrown rubble, and sniper sight lines, where crossing from east to west meant risking your life. Trees grew in the gaps between shattered storefronts. Grass pushed through the asphalt. Cats colonized the empty apartments. Nature reclaimed the center of the city while the people fought on either side of it. The line got its name not from any military designation, but from the vegetation, the weeds and shrubs that grew in the strip of land no one dared to cross. The Holiday Inn, a 26-story tower once built to welcome the world, became the most fought-over building in the war. Its height gave whichever faction held it a commanding view of the port and the Green Line. It changed hands multiple times. Each militia that took it turned hotel rooms into gun positions. The swimming pool on the upper floors was used as a sniper's nest, a place designed for leisure turned into a place designed for killing. Bullet holes patterned the facade in overlapping layers, each layer from a different battle, a different year, a different faction. The building still stands. It has never been repaired. It has never reopened. No one has ever agreed on what to do with it. In September 1982, Israeli forces surrounded the Palestinian refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila in the southern suburbs. Over approximately 40 hours, Lebanese Phalangist militia entered the camps and killed between 800 and 3,500 Palestinian and Lebanese civilians. Israeli forces illuminated the camps with flares throughout the night, but did not intervene. The massacre was investigated by an Israeli commission, which found that the defense minister at the time bore personal responsibility for failing to prevent the killings. The war ended in 1990. Solida, a private development company, demolished the shattered city center and rebuilt it as a modern financial district. More than 7 million cubic feet of ancient Beirut, including the city's 2,500-year-old urban grid, were bulldozed and dumped into the dread Mediterranean. But two structures survived that say something about how this city metabolizes its own wounds. The first is the Egg, a modernist cinema designed in 1965, never completed, its concrete shell pockmarked by bullets for 15 years on the Green Line. Developers wanted to demolish it. Activists saved it. It still stands, unfinished, scarred, surrounded by glass towers. A monument not to what was built, but to what survived by accident. The second is a nightclub built on a mass grave. In the Quarantina district, on Earth, where victims of a 1976 massacre were buried, architect Bernard Khoury designed B018. From street level, the building is invisible, a flat metal surface flush with the ground, like a submarine hatch. No sign, no facade. The entrance descends a flight of stairs into a long, low space. The seating is arranged in coffin-shaped recesses, hinged lids that open like caskets. The ceiling is the retractable roof, a hydraulic mechanism that splits open along its center, folding back to reveal the night sky. When the roof opens, the bass from the speakers rises into the open air. The dead are below, the living are above. The stars are visible through the gap. In the absence of public spaces above ground, Khoury has said, this club was designed not only for entertainment, but also to bring people together for therapy. The discomfort is the point. You are dancing on a grave. The building does not let you forget that. A mass grave turned into a dance floor. A retractable roof that lets the night sky into a space designed for the dead. This is a city that builds its future directly on top of its worst memories because there is nowhere else to build. South of Beirut, near the village of Cana, where biblical tradition places Christ's first miracle, turning water into wine, a different kind of history is written into the land. In April 1996, during an Israeli military operation, an artillery barrage hit a United Nations compound in Cana, where approximately 800 Lebanese civilians had taken shelter. They had come because they believed the UN flag would protect them. 106 people were killed. 10 years later, in July 2006, Cana was struck again. An airstrike hit a residential building in the same village, killing 28 people, 16 of them children. The youngest was 10 months old. The village, where tradition says water was turned into wine, has been struck twice by the same military, a decade apart. There is no metaphor adequate to that repetition. It is 6:07 p.m., August 4th, 2020. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored unsafely in a port warehouse since 2014, despite repeated warnings from customs officials, military leaders, and port workers who filed letters, reports, and formal complaints to at least a dozen government agencies. Detonate. One of the largest non-nuclear explosions in recorded history. The blast creates a shockwave that travels at the speed of sound across the city. 218 killed, 7,000 injured, 300,000 homeless in a single second. The blast is heard in Cyprus, 240 kilometers away. Windows shatter across the entire city. Cars are flipped, doors are ripped from their hinges. A grain silo at the port, a massive concrete structure visible from across the city, is torn apart, its contents scattered across the harbour. In a country that imports 80% of its food, the explosion destroyed the place where the food was stored. 6,000 buildings damaged, including 640 structures dating from the Ottoman and French Mandate periods. Buildings that had survived the Civil War, the 2006 bombardment, and decades of real estate pressure were erased in a microsecond. The Sursok Palace, a 19th century landmark in Ashrafia, had been damaged during the Civil War, painstakingly restored over decades, and was destroyed again. Its owner stood in the rubble. In a split second, everything was destroyed again. No senior official has been held accountable. The investigation has been obstructed, delayed, and politically blocked at every step. Lebanon imports 80% of what it consumes. Its currency lost 90% of its value between 2019 and 2023. Its electrical grid provides fewer than 4 hours of power per day. Its people, 5 million, plus 1.3 million Syrian refugees and 250,000 Palestinian refugees, the highest number per capita on Earth, continue to insist that it exists. Marcel Haddad is 68 years old. She lives in Ashrafia, the neighborhood closest to the port. She survived the Civil War as a young woman. 15 years of shelling, snipers, and nights spent in the basement of her building, listening to the walls shake. She married during the war, had 2 children during the war, sent them to school during the war, choosing routes through the city based on which streets had snipers that week and which did not. She survived the 2020 explosion, pulled from the rubble of her apartment, glass embedded in her arms, her furniture turned to splinters. She moved in with her sister for 4 months. She rebuilt. She returned to her apartment. She hung new curtains. She replaced the windows. She put photographs back on the walls. The same photographs, in the same frames, because the frames survived even when the glass did not. In March 2026, the building shook again. Airstrikes in the southern suburbs, close enough to crack her new windows. She has taped them with packing tape, the same technique people used during the Civil War. She has not left. "I was born in this city," she says. "My mother was born in this city. We do not leave." The seventh rebuilding was not finished when the eighth destruction began. Since March 2nd, 2026, Israel has been at war in Lebanon again. Over 1,500 people killed, more than 1.2 million displaced, 20% of the entire country. 472 schools converted to shelters. Children returning to the same classrooms where they sheltered during the 2024 escalation, not to learn, but to sleep on the floor again. Evacuation orders cover the entire area south of the Litani River, 850 square kilometers, home to at least 500,000 people. The Kazmir Bridge was destroyed. A single route remained between Beirut and Tyre, a city that has been continuously inhabited for 5,000 years. The road to one of the oldest places on Earth was being severed in real time. The displacement orders come by text message. Families pack in minutes. Some who had already fled to Beirut's southern suburbs were ordered to move again. Secondary displacement. Tertiary displacement. People who have fled 3 times in 2 years. On April 8th, the ceasefire between the United States and Iran was announced. Pakistan, which had mediated the deal, said Lebanon was included. Iran said the same. Israel said it was not. Hours later, 50 fighter jets dropped 160 munitions across central Beirut during morning rush hour, without warning. 5 neighborhoods hit simultaneously. Associated Press journalists reported charred bodies in vehicles and on the ground at one of Beirut's busiest intersections, the Corniche Al-Mazra neighborhood, a mixed commercial and residential area. A member of the Beirut municipality stood in the rubble and said, "This is a residential area. There is nothing here." A cemetery in the Beqaa Valley village of Shmestar was struck during a funeral. 10 mourners killed. 3 girls were killed in the coastal town of Adloun. An ambulance was struck near Tyre. Doctors Without Borders staff were injured at Hiram Hospital. Israel called it Operation Eternal Darkness. Lebanon's president called it a massacre. The Lebanese Red Cross reported at least 300 killed or wounded in Beirut and its surrounding areas. Civil defense teams were still searching through damaged buildings. The health minister described the situation as catastrophic. Displaced families who had packed their belongings upon hearing the ceasefire announcement and started driving home were caught in the bombing. Lebanese news reports showed a car in flames struck by an airstrike on the seafront in Sidon. A woman named Rana Dimashq, who had fled Beirut's southern suburbs 6 weeks earlier, said she had stayed up all night celebrating the ceasefire with her family in the vacant building where they had been sheltering. "We thought, we will go home, but then the bombs appeared." Spain accused Israel of violating international law. Italy summoned the Israeli ambassador. France called for the ceasefire to cover all fronts. The world condemned. The bombs continued. Adam Ansuli is 25 years old. He is a nurse at the American University Hospital in Beirut. After the strikes, The hospital issued an emergency appeal for blood donations as supplies ran low. Ambulances could not reach the wounded because the roads were blocked by the people trying to flee. The smell, the smoke, you can barely see, the fire, the sound of the screams, he said. In response, Iran announced it had closed the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that carries 20% of the world's oil supply, sealed because of bombs falling on a country smaller than Connecticut. The world argued about which nation was covered by which piece of paper. The bombs did not wait for the argument to be settled. Nada Siklawi is a Lebanese archaeologist who oversees heritage sites in the south. In the National Museum in Beirut, the same museum where the Ahriam sarcophagus sits behind the wall that protected it during the Civil War, the building shook from explosions while he spoke. "I am crying," he said. "If we have an enemy like Israel, what can we do with him?" The Phoenician inscriptions at Tyre are not data that can be backed up. They are singular objects. When they are gone in a way that nothing else in the modern world is gone. Because in the modern world, almost everything can be copied, saved, duplicated, restored. Stone, carved 3,000 years ago by hands that no longer exist, cannot. There is a particular cruelty in destroying the heritage of a country that gave the world the means to record its own heritage. The alphabet was invented here. The first books were shipped from here. The first law school was here. The act of writing, of preserving thought across time, began on this coast. And now the things that were written, carved, and built here are being erased faster than they can be documented. And yet, in the Chouf Mountains, the Al-Chouf Cedar Nature Reserve protects the largest remaining cedar forest in Lebanon. 230,000 trees across 550 square kilometers of mountain terrain. Established in 1996, 6 years after the Civil War ended. It is expanding. New seedlings are growing. Thin, pale green, no taller than a child's arm, pushing up through rocky soil in clearings where the canopy has thinned. The forest is not what it was when Gilgamesh described it, but it is more than it was 50 years ago. In the Kadisha Valley, the monasteries still hold services. The monks still chant in Syriac. The sound echoes off walls that have reflected the same prayers for 1,600 years. And in Byblos, the harbour wakes before dawn. Yusef Malouf ties off his boat at the same stone quay where Phoenician merchant ships loaded cedar and papyrus 7,000 years ago. His catch, sardines, red mullet, a few sea bream, will be sold by midday at the market beside the Crusader Gate. Tourists will walk past on their way to the ruins. Most will not notice him. He does not need them to. His grandfather fished here during the French Mandate. His father fished here during the Civil War, when the harbour was the only part of the city that kept functioning, because the fish did not care about the Green Line, and the sardines did not observe the ceasefire. Yusef fished here through the explosion, through the economic collapse, through the currency losing 90% of its value, which meant his catch was worth less in dollars, but still fed the same number of people. He fishes here now. His sons work in Beirut, office jobs, regular hours, salaries that do not depend on the weather. He does not blame them. The harbour is not what it was. Fewer boats launch each year. The younger fishermen leave for the city. But Yusef is still here, and the harbour is still here, and the sardines are still here. 7,000 years old, the oldest continuously operating port in the world. the place where the alphabet began its journey across the sea. And every morning, a man whose name will not appear in any history book pushes off from the same stones and does what his family has done since before writing existed. In the cedar grove above Bishari, the 375 remaining trees grow slowly in the thin mountain air, one ring per year, in every direction. They do not count the armies, they do not read the inscriptions carved into the cliff at Nar el-Kalb. They do not know about the alphabet, or the temples, or the nightclub built on the mass grave, or the fisherman who pushes off from the harbour each morning. They grow in the way that only something with no concept of urgency can grow, slowly, patiently, indifferent to the names that empires carve into rock to prove they were here. The cliff has room for more inscriptions. It always does. The empires are all gone. The fisherman is still fishing. The trees are still growing. Lebanon will be rebuilt. It always is. But the Palmyra Hotel cannot be unburned. The northern gate of Baalbek cannot be uncracked. The 7 million cubic feet of ancient Beirut dumped into the Mediterranean cannot be retrieved. Each cycle erases something that survived every previous cycle, and each reconstruction is built on a slightly thinner layer of what came before. The question is not whether Beirut will be rebuilt an 8th time. It will. The question is, what is lost each time that can never come back? If this documentary gave you something to think about, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next journey.